Today I'm back to do my annual video on the books that I read for the year because the year is pretty much over. There's one day left. So there were some differences this year for me as far as reading. I feel like I didn't read as much this year, but when I finally looked at my list and looked at the amount of books that I did read, I read my average amount. I think the reason for that is because I read a series this year, which I think took up a lot of like the number of books, but I think I still stuck with like my average number for the year. It just feels like I read less this year for some reason. I don't know why. Another theme for me this year that I noticed that was different is I read a lot more fiction, actually, which usually I'm more of a nonfiction reader, which I still love nonfiction, but this year I was just more into fiction. The first book that I read was The Last Olympian, which I started reading the Percy Jackson series towards the end of last year, so I hadn't finished the series before 2023 ended. So I started the year off finishing it by reading The Last Olympian, which is the fifth and final book in the Percy Jackson series. And I love the Percy Jackson series. It feels like it's been so long since I've read that series because that was literally at the beginning of this year. So I'm not sure that I remember like all of the thoughts that I had when I finished that book, but I do like the series. I think that The Last Olympian might have been less intense than what I thought that it would be. And if I'm being honest, I was expecting more important main characters to die. One in particular I was expecting to die. That character didn't die, which is fine. I'm glad that they're still alive, but I think Percy Jackson, I definitely think that it is a little bit more youthful when it comes to things like that. Now, maybe other Rick Riordan series aren't, but I feel like the Percy Jackson series is. And speaking of Rick Riordan series, the series that I read this year was the Heroes of Olympus series. I don't even know if I can put all of them in this video. And they're probably backwards. That's the order. Yeah. So this is the series that I read this year. I think that this series directly follows the Percy Jackson series because in the beginning, it's like, I think 9 months after everything happened from The Last Olympian, which was, again, the last book in the Percy Jackson series. There's 5 books, again, to read in this series. They are definitely longer books, but they have more characters. Like you read from the perspective of different characters, not just Percy. And I have some mixed feelings about this series. I think that I kind of broke one of my rules. I normally don't make myself finish books that I'm not super into, but I just wanted to know how this series ended because I love Percy Jackson. Like he's probably one of my favorite characters in the Percy Jackson series. So I loved that he was in the Heroes of Olympus series. I wanted to see what would happen, but I will say I did not like the series as much as the original Percy Jackson series. I'll kind of briefly break down each book. The Lost Hero, the first book, amazing. I love Jason. Piper's all right. And Leo is my favorite. I feel like he's a lot of people's favorite. The Son of Neptune was boring to me. I'm sorry. Hazel is not the most interesting character to me, and neither is Frank. I'm sorry. They're cool. They have their moments. Like in the House of Hades and the Blood of Olympus, Hazel gets a little bit better. Frank does too. But honestly, I couldn't get into it. I did like that you can read from Annabeth's perspective. I think she has a very like mature tone to her parts in the series. But even Mark of Athena and the Blood of Olympus a little bit, I just feel like they were more boring. I think the Son of Neptune was probably the most boring one to me. The Lost Hero and House of Hades are the best books in the series. And in Blood of Olympus, they included another character, Reyna, her perspective. And I felt like it was a little bit unnecessary. I would have liked to hear from like the main characters' perspectives. And also the ending was a little disappointing, not gonna lie. It felt like it kind of built up to something that could have been done very well. And then Rick Riordan just took it away within like 2 sentences. So if you've read the series, you know what I'm talking about. And if you have read the series, let me know what you think about it because I'm curious if other people share the same opinions I do. I have not gone back to the Rick Riordan universe. I'm worried that I might get a little bit bored or burnt out by reading some of his series, if they're kind of like the Heroes of Olympus. But I do want to read the newest books that he has written to kind of expand on the Percy Jackson series for sure. I think those might be more interesting just because they're more related to the Percy Jackson series itself. So let me know what y'all think if y'all have read the series. Now, I didn't read the Heroes of Olympus series like one after another. I kind of read them just throughout the year. This isn't the order that I read all these books in, but I just wanted to get that series out of the way. But I also read this book called The 12th House by Karen, I don't know, Hamaker, I don't know. This book, this is an astrology book for those of you watching who don't know anything about astrology. The 12th house is one of the astrological houses in a birth chart or a natal chart. And I just wanted to read about the 12th house. I wanted to learn more about it. And I do like certain things about this book. I think that it's interesting in that it does describe the unconscious elements of the 12th house, but it doesn't really talk about like descriptions on certain planets or even transits or aspects to anything related to your 12th house. Like it doesn't go through the planets or signs ruling the 12th house or planets in the 12th house. It kind of briefly touches on some of them, but not with the depth that I was hoping for. I don't even think I finished it all the way because, again, I was just kind of not as into it. I sometimes struggle to follow astrologers or people who are very into astrology. And by follow, I mean like listen to their videos or their content, their podcasts, or read their books or read any of their writing. If they add a lot of mysticism to astrology, I feel like I used to have that perspective a lot. So I understand it and I understand why they view astrology through that lens. I just feel like I have a more grounded and pragmatic approach to astrology now. And I think it stems a lot from a background in psychology and counseling that has led me to approach it in that way. And I think that was the issue that I had with this book, is besides it not having the descriptions on the planets that I was hoping for, it also just added too much mysticism to the 12th house and like the idea of what the 12th house is. If you're into astrology though, definitely read it if you think that it could help you, which again, I think that there's still something to gain from it. It just wasn't exactly what I wanted. After that, I read a nonfiction book and it's called Why Does He Do That? The subtitle is Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men by Lundy Bancroft. This book is really good. This is a book basically about abusive partners and, you know, getting inside the minds of them and learning about why men in particular abuse their partners, female partners. So I guess that's one limitation of this book, is it is focused on like heterosexual relationships. It does, I think, touch on homosexual relationships. There's no mention of relationships with people who identify as transgenders. But besides that, I think it's very useful and insightful to read this book, especially if you have struggled with relationships that have abusive patterns or dynamics. If you know of anybody who struggles with it, if you are in the helping fields like social work, counseling, psychology, things like that, this book is definitely important to read, just so you're aware of what some of the signs are and where they might be stemming from. While it does focus on men, I do think that it's important for everyone to read, because I think even though it focuses on why men might be like more of the controlling partner, I do think that some things in here could be patterns or traits that everybody could potentially display or exhibit in their relationships. So I think that it's still valuable just to read from that perspective, because while yes, a male who is more controlling and angry and domineering and maybe abusive could cause more potential harm or danger, you know, if it's towards a woman, because a woman would be more vulnerable in that situation. I do still think that women could still benefit from reading this book, because I don't think that these traits are only limited to men. I just think that that was the focus of his book, obviously. But there could still be some themes like that in other people's lives, and that could be interesting to learn about. So I definitely recommend that book. After that, I read Pet Sematary by Stephen King, and I have already done a video on that book because I like to review Stephen King books. I just love his writing and think his books are really good. So I did read Pet Sematary. If you want to know my thoughts on Pet Sematary, you can go ahead and watch that video. I will link it in the cards for you. After Pet Sematary, I read this book called Sex Without Stress by Jessa Zimmerman, who is a licensed counselor. And I read this book because of my career. I just felt like this book was going to help me in my work. It was important for me to learn about sex therapy and sex therapy techniques. So this was just the resource that I turned to. And I actually really liked this book, and I would really recommend it. Even if you're not in like the counseling or psychology field, I think that this book is very useful and helpful. It's very eye-opening, especially if you are either in a relationship or have personally struggled with any sexual intimacy issues, either physically or emotionally. I think that this book is very helpful and very useful to learn about, especially if you use this book with your partner. Like if you utilize some of the practices and techniques and, reflective questionings, processing questions with your partner, your significant other, if you are in a relationship. But obviously, if you are single, you can still do that. This book is really good, so I would definitely recommend it. After that, I read The Enneagram by Helen Palmer, and I didn't finish the entire book. I just read parts of it because I wanted to read about certain Enneagram types, particularly mine and my boyfriend's type. I don't actually know which type I am. There are a few that I relate with. I've taken like the free tests online, but I've never taken any like official test from the Enneagram Institute, I believe. So I don't know what type I am, to be honest, but that is one that I would recommend because it does go into a lot of depth if you're interested in the Enneagram. So check that book out. After that, I read Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and this is by Lindsay Gibson. The subtitle is How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents. I like this book a lot. I read this again just for my career. I like that it differentiated traits between emotional maturity and emotional immaturity, and it has different traits of different types of parents, like distant, rejecting, self-involved, and how those different parenting styles and traits affect their children. So this book is really interesting, especially if you have personal experience with less emotionally mature parents. Then I think that this book could be very helpful and very useful. After that, I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This red sticker is kind of obnoxious, so just ignore that. It's not like a sticker that I can take off. It's literally part of the cover, and I don't like the way it looks. But this is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is a very popular book. I don't have TikTok, but I have heard that this is a very popular book on BookTok, which is the TikTok version of BookTube. I heard a lot about this book before I read it, and I was very excited to read it. It's like a murder thriller type of book. It's not really so much a mystery. People describe this book as like dark academia. So that's why I was really interested in reading it. I also read it like around the fall time, which I think was a very appropriate time to read it. It kind of fit with the mood and the vibe of the season. And I did really like this book. If you don't know anything about it, it's about this group of they're young adults at a college. I think it's a private college in Vermont. The murder thriller part of it is a character in the book dies, and you know who kills that character, but you don't know why. So basically, in the very beginning of the book, you find out about the murder that happens. So then the rest of the book is just kind of the events leading up to the murder and why and what actually happened and everything involved with the murder. And then, after the murder and things like that. So it is interesting. I did like it. I would recommend it. The characters honestly are weird. I'll just say that. They are weird and they are kind of messed up. They're not sane or normal. I don't really know how else to describe it. You just kind of have to read it. It is interesting, but I will be honest, I think it's a little bit overrated. I don't think that it has the level of depth that maybe some people were wanting to give it. It does have some depth, especially when it comes to issues of like wealth and status, like classism. There are themes of that in this book. And there is like, you know, this depth when it comes to understanding like humans suppressing certain traits like anger or the desire to just be like a little unhinged. It reminded me also of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky a lot. If you know about Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov in that book goes through like a mental and emotional turmoil after he commits a murder as well. There is a little bit of a similar theme in The Secret History like that, just not with the same level of depth like Dostoevsky has in Crime and Punishment, which, you know, that's fine. They're different authors. It's hard to like match Dostoevsky. That's also a very old book. This one I think was written in the 90s, but it does have a similar theme in the intensity of it when it comes to like the suspense and thriller elements of the book. So if you like Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky and you want something similar but like lighter as well, you would probably like this book. And if you just like murder mysteries, you would also probably like this book. That's The Secret History. Now I'm at the end of my list. The last two books that I'm going to talk about, I haven't finished. I am still reading them. I am currently reading a book called Freedom from Self-Harm by Kim Gratz and Alexander Chapman. And the subtitle is Overcoming Self-Injury with Skills from DBT and Other Treatments. So again, I'm reading this for my work. This is just important information for me to know. And I also wanted to learn about it because I think that it's helpful to know. I think that self-harm, there's a lot of stigma around it. A lot of people don't understand it. If you're somebody who struggles with self-harm, or if you know somebody who struggles with self-harm, or if you are in like the helping fields like counseling, psychology, social work, even like medical fields like nurses, doctors, really anybody I think could benefit from learning more about it. Self-harm is an act that goes against the human instinct to avoid harm and danger. Like we as humans naturally have an instinct towards self-preservation. So we look at self-harm and it's goes against that basic instinct. So I think that's why it has a lot of stigma, and some people are even afraid of it. They have a lot of assumptions about people who self-harm that, you know, aren't always helpful. If you're interested in learning more about that, then I would definitely recommend this book. I am also currently reading To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and this has been on my list of books to read for a long time. I think I read it like when I was in 9th grade in high school. I don't remember paying that much attention to it, but obviously I know what it's about, and I want to read more classic books and Pulitzer Prize books, which this one is one. And that is the end of my list of books for this year. And usually I talk about the next book that I want to read, which I already have it. I checked it out of the library, and it's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. This book is really popular, and I've been wanting to read it for a long time, and I don't know, it was just calling to me, so I checked it out. Hopefully I'll start reading it soon. Sometimes I don't like to start books if I haven't finished other ones. So we'll see. We'll see when I start this book, or if I even start it or read it, who knows. Another one that has been on my mind actually to read is a book by Sam Harris. I believe it's called Spirituality Without God or something like that. I don't know. I'll insert a picture of the book. That book has also been kind of on my mind to read. Let me know what your favorite book was that you read this year, or what books you've read this year, if you have read any, what books you plan on reading this upcoming year. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.